Okay, hello, I am Benjamin Martinez and I am going to have an interview with Ken Scott with the purpose of knowing more about British culture and museums as an IB test for my English test. Ken, we know that the British culture has a long history. Which do you think are the main features of the British cultures?
I think William Shakespeare. The works of William Shakespeare are world renowned. They stand in the same league as the works of Mozart and Beethoven, and the plays of William Shakespeare, in my mind, are absolutely brilliant. Turning to something different, I think that Britain's performance in 2 world wars was absolutely superb. The First World War from 1914 to 1918 was won obviously with the aid of our French allies and with our American allies, and indeed we had the Italians fighting on our side at that time. But the stability of the British troops in the trenches in the First World War was absolutely superb. I also think that standing alone against the might of Germany in 1940, when Germany conquered the continent, was, as Churchill said, one of the finest hour in British history. I also think that in 1960 was a turning point in British history. In the 1960s, people took over. There's more new design, new music. The traditional music disappeared. The Beatles and the pop bands appeared, and things changed. Not only did music and fashion, design change, but people's attitude changed. They no longer accepted the status quo. They started to question things, and we had a kind of renaissance, not a renaissance, perhaps a birth of different ideas, and a whole change in British history started in the 1960s.
Okay. As very culture, the British culture has got positive and negative aspects. What do you think are the main positive aspects of British culture?
I think that there is, in public life until recently, there's also always been a respect for law, there's been respect for moral rights. For example, the abolition of the slave trade, in particular, was one of the great turning points in British history. We've got a respect for law. Governments cannot change laws. They try to bend them a bit, but I think the respect for law, a tradition of liberty, which has been copied by people all over the world.
Okay. In your opinion, what are the main negative aspects of the British culture?
I think perhaps at the moment we've got too big a reliance on the state. Every country has a public sector and a private sector. The public sector creates the wealth and the private sector spends it. And now we have too great a reliance on people receiving state handouts. The other thing is we've got an abuse of privilege. Banks, politicians, police, the press, I have never known a period in British history when the main institutions of British life have been so much under pressure and carry so little respect. We've had the problem with the politicians who were claiming too much in expenses. That was a scandal. We've had the problem with the banks who were guilty of casino banking. They weren't looking after money. They were gambling in property bonds in the weak American market. It's 1926 crash all over again. We've got the police who have treated the press, for example, with too much leniency over the phone hacking scandals which have rocked the country, and of course the banks. Again, more than any of the others, the banks.
Since all cultures are different, what do you think are the main aspects in which the British culture differs from the rest of European cultures?
I think we have a continuity and a stability which other countries don't. If you look at the disruption of the continent in the 20th century, for example, Russia, Germany, Austria, all lost their monarchs in 1917, 1918. France was heavily defeated in 1940 and had to change from the Third Republic to the Fourth Republic, and then the Fourth Republic collapsed with the collapse of the North African Empire, had the Fifth Republic. But we've had stability. We've had the same institutions over several centuries, and they've gradually emerged and changed.
In your opinion, what aspects of European culture should the British culture incorporate?
I think there are two aspects of European culture which the British could do well to follow. The Germans are doing exceptionally well at the moment. They've got huge geographical, political and economic advantages right at the heart of Europe, with transport links to all other European countries. They are now integrated after the reunification of Germany, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. But they've got a work ethic. People in Germany work. The other thing I like about European culture is that the French are very much family orientated. In England, for example, people go on holidays in droves, in peer groups, age groups, to seaside resorts, but the French don't have that. They all go on holiday as families. Fine, I think you call it a Catholic tradition.
What do you think are the main aspects of the French culture that the British culture should incorporate?
Should incorporate?
Yes.
Oh, I said the family. I think that they have this family orientation, which I admire.
Okay. What do you think are the main aspects of the Italian culture that the British should incorporate?
I don't really think the Italians can teach us anything. The Italians are in a bad way. They performed badly in 2 world wars. Their economy is in ruin. They've had a lot of political scandals. They've not dealt adequately with the mafia, for example. But Italian design is something which we could really possibly copy.
Since our culture is much more recent than yours, what do you know about the Latin American cultures?
Well, I taught geography, and at one time I spoke Spanish, but because I started to do a lot of work in France, I started to concentrate on French, and I can converse in French, and I forgot most of the Spanish. I know quite a bit about Latin American culture, because obviously knowing that you have Catholic values, and I've seen that operate all over Europe. I know quite a bit about Latin America.
Since we are in our study trip in Europe, what do you know about Chile?
I know that Chile is a long country. I know that you've got 3 climatic regions, that in the north you have the Atacama Desert, that in the central part you have a most agreeable climate where you produce a lot of wine. I know that in the south you are down in the Tierra del Fuego, which is a wild region. I know that you have the Andes Mountains. I know that you have a school called Mackay School, which I see every year, and I really look forward to seeing the boys from Mackay School. I also know that I've dealt with them for 14 years, and I have found the boys from Mackay School always be exceptionally well behaved, the school to be well organised, and I would say that looking back into the 1960s, when I was a boy at school, we had grammar schools where the boys dressed in uniform, and we had separate boys and girls school, which we don't have now, and everybody's exceptionally well behaved. Basically, you are turning back the clock, for me, about 40 or 50 years to a much better era, and I really appreciate that.